Hello world, how are you doing? I thought we would have a quick look at this. This is an SB Components RFID reader expansion board for Raspberry Pi Pico. I bought a few of these for a project and I thought they were quite nicely designed boards, so I thought I'd have a quick look at one and get it up and running and have a go with it. It arrived in an anti-static bag, we'll just put that to one side, and here is the board itself. It has a slot for a Raspberry Pi Pico with breakout pins on either side, so you can still access all of the GPIO pins of the Pico. It has an RFID reader module, as you might expect. It has a teeny tiny little buzzer attached to it as well, and it also has a tiny display screen down here at the bottom as well. So it already has everything built onto the board, which is really super convenient. Of course, the display, the RFID reader and the buzzer take up some of the GPIO pins of the Pico, so there are also some jumpers up here at the top so that you can reassign the pins if you want to. It doesn't come with a case or anything, but it does have mounting holes in the corners, so you could make a mounting board for it, or you could 3D print a case or something like that. Mine did come with a Raspberry Pi Pico, which obviously fits over here onto the board. I bought these on Amazon, and the product description was a bit confusing. It did in one place say that a Pico would not be supplied, and then another place said it would, and mine did come with the Picos. So I'm not sure if they will all come with a Pico or not. You can see it's an original version 1 Pico, and it did have the headers already fitted. Also, each one of them came with an RFID card, so anyone who has used an RFID reader on a Pi or an Arduino or something like that before will probably recognize these. It's the typical sort of card that you get supplied with the reader. Every one of these supposedly has a unique code programmed onto it. I'm not sure if that's actually true. And it also comes with an RFID key fob as well. So you can sort of experiment with the device, and of course if you have your own cards and tags you can also use those instead. The only thing that it doesn't come with is a power cable for the Pico, but of course they are very common, so I'm just using this one that I bought at Poundland, so it's not a very expensive thing. So what I'm going to do is plug in the board. There is a sample program that is available on GitHub, and I'm going to download the sample program, put it onto the Pico and see if I can get it to work. So here we are on the GitHub page for this board. This is the manufacturer's own sample code. There is a file here called boardtest.py, which is the main sample program. There's a picture of the board. It mentions here which pins are being used by the various components. Here's a list of the requirements. We have the RFID board, we have the Pico, we have a USB cable, and I don't plan to reassign the pins, so the jumper cables are not required. Let's have a look at the steps we need to follow. Plug the Pico into the board, plug the cable into the Pico, set the jumpers if necessary, download the repository from this page, copy some of the files from the repository to the Pico, open the sample code in Thonny IDE, set up MicroPython on the Pico and run the program. Click on the green play button to run the example code. Now tap your RFID card on the reader to print output on the display and make a beep. And there is a little video here of someone doing just that. So all that looks fine, so I'll scroll back to the top, and on the code menu I'll pick download zip, and that goes into my downloads folder. The next step is to do exactly what it says on this page. I'm going to plug in the Pico and the board and download the files onto the Pico. Okay, so I've done step 1, plug in the Raspberry Pi Pico, and step 2, plug in the USB cable, and I've plugged it into my laptop. And there's a power LED to show the board is at least powered on. So here we are in Thonny. This is the editor that is very common to use with Raspberry Pi Pico and MicroPython. I have extracted the files from the zip file I downloaded from GitHub and put them into a folder. There is a folder called lib, and that contains the 3 files that I need to copy over to the Pico. The first step here is to set up the Pico. This is a fresh board, so I need to set up MicroPython on the board before I can use it. I'll start by picking Tools and Options. Here I can see a choice of the various interpreters supported by Thonny, and I can see that MicroPython for the Pico is selected by default. Next I'll pick the USB port that my Pico is connected to. This is the first time I've used these boards, so I'm going to pick Install or Update MicroPython. In this case the Pico appears straight away. If it doesn't, it might be necessary to reboot it while holding in the boot cell button on the board, as described in the panel in the middle of the screen. I'll pick MicroPython family RP2, and under variant I'll pick Raspberry Pi Pico, and this is a version 1 board. I'll leave the version number as the default and click Install. Okay, all done, so I'll click Close. And then back on this screen again, I'll click OK. Now we get a MicroPython interactive shell down here at the bottom of the screen. If it doesn't appear or any other errors appear, make sure the correct device is selected down in the bottom right of the screen. Also, we get a file browser window for the Pico over here on the left as well. Now I'm going to copy those 3 files from the lib folder over to the Pico. I'll select them in the top panel, then right click and select Upload, and they get copied across. Now let's have a look at the boardtest.py program provided on the GitHub page. At the top of the code it's importing some libraries and configuring the pins used by the RFID reader, the buzzer and the display. Then in the main loop it is trying to read from the RFID reader, and if there is data to read, it beeps the buzzer and displays the card ID on the display. Okay, without making any changes, I'm going to run the code on the Pico using the Run button up here on the toolbar. Straight away the output window is filled with messages because there is a print statement inside the main loop that prints this message every iteration. Now let's check if the code is working. Here's the board with the code up and running. I'll try scanning the card that came with the unit. Then the key fob that came with the unit. And each time the ID is displayed on the tiny screen, so it looks like it is working successfully. And it is also doing a beep every time I tap a card as well. So I just want to try making a simple change to the code. A common use of RFID readers is in security systems to allow or disallow entry into buildings. I have a bunch of these RFID cards, so I have marked some of them as good cards and some as bad cards, and I have scanned each one to make a record of the ID of the card. And I'm going to make a change to the code to show an appropriate message on the screen when a card is beeped. Okay, I'm back here in Thonny with the boardtest.py program from the GitHub repository. The first thing I'm going to do is comment out this line that says print AAAA, because that prints out a message every iteration through the loop and obscures any other message that might be displayed. I've got 5 RFID cards and I've beeped them all to find their IDs. So I'm going to make a couple of lists. I'll make a list called good cards, I'll just paste in the IDs, and I'll make a list of bad cards and paste those IDs in as well. Now I'm going to make a change in the main loop. So here we are reading the value from the RFID reader into a variable called command. The IDs are 12 characters, so it's trying to read 12 characters at a time. If it's successful, it gives us back a bytes object, so we have to decode that into a string. I'm just going to modify the code to save that decoded string into a variable called decoded. Then I'm going to check to see if that card is in one of the lists. So I'll add a conditional statement first to check if it is in the good cards list. If it is, I'll write out a message on the display. Otherwise, if it's in the list of known bad cards, I'll write that out too. And if it is not in either list, we probably still want to reject it as an unknown card, so we'll add that as an else. Okay, let's try running it, and it looks like I've got an error. Inevitably, I've made a typo. I've missed a colon out on this line here. I'll just put that in and try again. And this time the program starts up successfully. Okay, I'll just check that the code change is working. I'll try a mix of good cards and known bad cards and check the output on the display. Also, I didn't add any of the key tags to the lists, so if I try one of those, it should come up as unknown. Great, it looks like everything is working okay. Okay, that's my quick look at this RFID reader board with a Raspberry Pi Pico. Overall, I think it's a nicely designed board and it's very convenient to have everything in one place. I think the one possible downside is the beeper. It is basically just an on-off device. For example, it has no capability for playing different tones if the user scans a good card or a bad card. If I was using this in a project, I would probably replace that with a more capable device. I think the next thing I want to do with these is maybe 3D print some cases for them and try using them in some projects, and maybe try it with a Raspberry Pi Pico W and a battery pack, so I can use the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi and these can be wireless units. But that's all I've got to say for now, so see you around.